This is the Chris Stigall Show podcast.
Okay, guys, let's just rip. And Chris Stigall.
Chris Stigall. Chris, thanks for being with me tonight.
Chris Stigall.
I'm joined now by Chris Stigall.
Now, he puts the broad in broadband. It's Chris Stigall.
The Chris Stigall podcast is presented by usmedicalplan.com. Save big money monthly and get better health coverage at usmedicalplan.com.
It's Friday, the 18th day of August. Thanks so much for downloading the Chris Stigall Show podcast. Coming up today, my buddy Daniel Turner, founder, executive director of Power the Future. More details on why Maui burned, who was responsible. Ultimately, here's the punchline: Democrats and Democrat policies. So Daniel will be here. It's also the one-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act, which supposedly transfers us to a greener future. Or some rot. So we'll talk with Daniel about that. Dr. Tim Murphy is back with us, former congressman, a psychologist, and he'll talk about this scourge of gender dysphoria and why it must be tackled and why you and I are duty-bound to, I would say, not just in our schools, but also start seeking mental health professionals and medical professionals who are not tied to this cabal of, I'm sorry to say, everything has to be this way now, left-wing ideology. We now have to look for people of faith everywhere we shop, everywhere we seek out medical advice and education. I mean, if you're a believer anyway, and I am, I'm now looking through that prism at everything that I do and consume and seek out for help and advice for friends and family and my kids. I'm so sorry to say in this conversation, you're going to hear that even in children's medicine and psychology today, left-wing ideology is driving so much of it. It's sad, it's sick, and Dr. Murphy will talk with us about that. And his number one book for pastoral care, it's selling like crazy right now. It's called The Christ Cure. We'll talk about that. The DeSantis team is getting some interesting counsel. There's a new memo that's been uncovered that Team DeSantis is supposed to do something in particular next week during this Republican debate. Trump won't be participating, but Trump is not going to be the story, actually. Trump being there or not being there is actually not the story of next week. I'll tell you specifically what they're suggesting DeSantis do, his team, his PAC is telling him to do. It might surprise you, and I think it's going to make for a more interesting debate than we first thought. So that's on the way and other news of the day. But first, let me tell you about the guy that makes this podcast possible, the guy that underwrites it each and every day. His name is John Ruhlman. His service is usmedicalplan.com. A gentleman reached out to me just yesterday who's trying to find cheaper health insurance for their township police department. And I said, you got to call John because he knows 80 different private insurers across the country. He knows how to find you the cheapest medical care, or at least insurance rates that you're paying monthly premiums on, the cheapest possible for the best coverage. He knows it better than anybody I know. And we're talking about saving you hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars a month, 30 to 60% on your health insurance needs. Seniors, small business owners, just independent people who are supplying insurance for themselves or their families. Please give John a couple of minutes. Let him save you some money. Let him run the numbers and the coverage on your current insurance. Let him help you. I think he will. I think you're going to be shocked at the improvement. 877-410-4321. 877-410-4321 or usmedicalplan.com. It would come as no surprise to you that a blue state governor and his blue state emergency management staff are resigning one by one in disgrace, and that the more we learn about these Maui wildfires, the more we learn it was a failure of government response. It was a failure to evacuate the island. It was a failure to sound the sirens. It was a failure to coordinate energy companies in repairing their lines because they were moving to a green energy delivery system eventually. So they figured, why bother wasting time, money, and effort and investing in our current grid issues? We'll just put it off, is effectively what these reports are now saying. So this was not climate change. This was... my friend Guy Shiraki said it, and I thought it was a great, apt analogy. This is very, very much the Hurricane Katrina of their island. This is school bus Ray Nagin. Remember Ray Nagin down there in New Orleans? The guy who had all of those school buses at his disposal to evacuate the city, and he didn't use them, and they just sat there flooded. You remember that failed evacuation effort? And they blamed it on George W. Bush. Now, if Donald Trump were president right now, and this had happened, do you suppose Donald Trump would bear responsibility for half of Hawaii, half of Maui, having burned, and perhaps hundreds, thousands, they're saying, by the time they recover, everyone dead? Do you think Trump would bear responsibility for this? His emergency management people? Something? I'm sure they would find a way, don't you suppose?
I think it would be totally blamed on Trump. There's no question about it.
But yet somehow Biden is barely asked about this, and when he is, my wife Jill, I'll be there eventually. I want to stay out of their way. And we did a little digging. I didn't know this. Fast Eddie actually brought this to my attention. The guy who governs Hawaii went to school at Penn State.
Yes, he did.
Is he a native Pennsylvanian, or he just studied here?
He just studied here. He's from New York, though, originally.
What? Yeah, like, in what universe is the governor of Hawaii? I mean, that just shows the people of Hawaii, I guess, don't care if you want to hire an interloper to come in and run your state. So be it. I guess, is it because nobody's from Hawaii anymore? There's no native Hawaiian who wants to govern that state, so they just import people. A New Yorker who went to Penn State now governs Hawaii. Anyway, a Maui County official criticized for his handling of the wildfire disaster that tore through the historic district of Lahaina resigned yesterday, citing health reasons. Yeah. Maui Emergency Management Administrator Herman Andaya tendered his resignation effective immediately. Given the gravity of the crisis we are facing, my team and I will be placing someone in his key position as quickly as possible. Then this story. Hawaiian Electric knew of wildfire threat but waited years to act. During the 2019 wildfire season, one of the worst Maui's ever seen, Hawaiian Electric concluded that it needed to do far more to prevent its power lines from emitting sparks. The utility examined California's plans to reduce fires ignited by power lines, started flying drones over its territory, vowed to take steps to protect its equipment and its customers from the threat of fire. 4 years later, the company has completed very little work. In fact, between 2019 and last year, they invested less than $250,000 on wildfire-specific projects on the island, regulatory filings show. They say that Maui is full now of all kinds of native grasses that didn't used to be there and basically went up, like dried hay when these sparks happen. Now, look, utility lines falter and they spark and all of that. I get it. But the claim is here that there was more that could be done. In fact, Hawaiian Electric themselves have admitted there was more that should have been done. The company facing scrutiny, litigation, financial crisis over indications its power lines played the role in igniting the deadliest wildfire in a century. Hawaiian Electric said it would investigate any role its infrastructure may have played and cooperate in a separate probe. Company spokesman said wildfire risk was spending on it, part of its routine utility work, including trimming or removing trees and upgrading, replacing, inspecting equipment. They spent $84 million, blah, blah, blah. I'm loath to pile on utility companies. Former regulators and energy company officials said the utility had to be focused at that time on procuring renewable energy. Instead, Hawaii has been on a push to convert to renewables since 2008, when a run-up on oil prices sent electric rates at Hawaiian Electric, which relied on petroleum imports for 80% of their electric, sent it through the roof. In 2015, lawmakers passed legislation mandating the state derive 100% of their electricity from renewable sources by 2045. Now, what about that suicide pact? Think of that. The state of Hawaii's legislature told their power company, we want to be 100% renewable. Now, I know most of us are not in the power production business, but I think all of us can understand easy math. Ready? At present, 80% of the product we produce is produced with petroleum in 2022. You want us to be 100% renewable power supply by 2045. Now, that may sound like a lot of time to you and me, but this now explains why Hawaiian Electric, for their part, is like, well, screw it. I guess we're now focused on windmills and solar panels. We're not going to spend a ton of money on power lines that we can't even, ostensibly we're not going to be able to use. 80% of our energy supply comes from petroleum, and there's a war on that now. In 2019, under pressure to replace the output of 2 conventional power plants set to retire, the company sought to contract for 900 megawatts of renewable energy. So this is a story of tragic mismanagement. This Herman and Daya and others are facing mounting scrutiny over their response for not sounding alarms. There's a story today that said that they had an alarm system, kind of a, if you want, like a tornado siren system, and he didn't use it. He decided not to use it and said, it wouldn't have saved those people anyway. Apparently, some of the pictures I've seen too, you're talking about 2-lane roads, but apparently, even people trying to get out of there as this fire is swallowing the island, what you do often, and we've seen this before, when there's an accident in the middle of the highway, what do the police often do? They will shut down the highway, they'll reverse traffic, and they will turn both lanes of the highway in one direction, right? They didn't do that here. So they didn't have, you literally see lines of cars on one side of the road charred. Again, I'm not in emergency management. I don't pretend to know and understand how you evacuate people off of an island that's burning. But it's clear there are certain things that these people know how to do, they're trained to do, and they didn't do it. This is a calamity of errors, is what it sounds like to me, just like Hurricane Katrina. And at the time when that Hurricane Katrina happened, we were told George Bush let black people die. So I guess we could say Joe Biden let Hawaiians die, Native Hawaiians. Joe Biden killed Native Hawaiians. In fact, if you remember back then, Kanye West, a little less hospitable to Republicans then, went on a telethon and said George Bush doesn't care about black people, if you remember that. Big celebrity telethon. So are we going to have a big celebrity telethon for the residents of Maui, where they will lecture about Joe Biden not caring about Native Hawaiians? Just a question, because it's the exact same circumstance. Democrat mismanagement got hundreds and hundreds of people killed. But I guess they're not going to blame the incredible husk. Memo went out about the coming debate. I don't know if you are going to watch that or not. I'm still trying to figure out whether we are or not. I guess we'll have to. I'm not entirely sure how I want to talk about it next week, but the New York Times has released this internal memo to Team DeSantis. And apparently, according to this internal memo, the counsel to DeSantis is, let's start hitting Vivek and hitting him hard. Team DeSantis is apparently pretty concerned about Vivek Ramaswamy now surging and cutting into what has been long considered their presumptive second place. And so this strategic memo now says that next week, during the Republican presidential debate that Trump is not participating in, at least as we understand right now, DeSantis is going to go hard at Vivek and apparently, according to the memo, defend Donald Trump from any and all attacks. So the pugnacious Chris Christie, who can't even catch a break in New Hampshire, he's trailing third in even New Hampshire, the place where he's like ride or die. That's his entire focus. He's all in on New Hampshire. He's going to show up and do nothing but pummel Trump. And so the DeSantis people have counseled him, at least in this memo, defend Trump from all of that and go hard at Vivek Ramaswamy. How do you think that's going to play? Taking Trump out of this for a minute. Let's just take Trump away. How do you think a Vivek Ramaswamy versus Ron DeSantis battle will play out, Fast Eddie? I'm kind of intrigued.
I like it too because I haven't seen anything take down Vivek yet at all. Like all of the things that have come his way, he's been able to counter. So with someone like Ron DeSantis, same thing. Think of how he handled the media all during COVID. There was nothing that could stop him. So that's going to be very interesting to watch.
The 2-page memo written by leaders of a pro-DeSantis super PAC. And by the way, this pro-DeSantis super PAC is run, in the interest of full disclosure, by a very close and good friend of mine and has been a guest on the show before named Jeff Rowe. Super PACs are not official campaign. People have reached out to me. They say, you say you can't get DeSantis on the show. I thought you said you know Jeff. I do. But I've told you, number one, Jeff's primary responsibility to the DeSantis team is raising money. And even more than that right now, their entire focus is winning Iowa, South Carolina, and New Hampshire. They're not spending a bunch. I mean, yes, they'll do some select national media outlets with the intention of touching some of these early primary state voters, but they're not doing mass media visits. They're very singularly focused on raising money and targeting Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. So assuming DeSantis comes through these and does well, he'll visit with us. I'm confident of that. But I just always like full disclosure. Yes, I know Jeff. I know him well. He's a very good friend. Former, he's a little older than me, but we went to the same school. He was in my fraternity, whole deal. He's done very well for himself. Jeff Rowe is the guy that ran Ted Cruz's successful presidential campaign challenge to Donald Trump. They won Iowa, as you remember. Or no, I misremember it. Well, neither here nor there. I can't remember which states were which, but it might have been Ben Carson that won Iowa. I remember back then now. But anyway, Cruz went from, single-digit polling, and Jeff and his team successfully helped Ted Cruz, as you remember, surge to basically second in the pack, and it was a neck-and-neck fight with Donald Trump all the way through Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is never relevant in Republican primaries. It's usually settled on the candidate by then, and as you remember, Cruz and Trump were... This is what I said yesterday. I'm reading so many surrogates. They're trying to frame this. It's like a boxing match. They're trying to frame and promote this coming debate. And all the surrogates are on Twitter hating on one another, aggressively hating on one another. Trump has canceled his Monday press conference, by the way, he says on advice of his attorneys. He's not going to host it now. He says that the evidence that he has of voter fraud in Georgia, they're going to enter as evidence. His attorneys have said, please do not do this, because if you do, you're going to make lives for us very difficult in defending you in Georgia. Let's enter this as evidence in Georgia. Trump has apparently, according to his media posts, said he's acquiesced to his attorneys on this one and said, okay, fine. We'll enter it as evidence in the trial. So surrogates are equal parts trying to frame Trump as done and cooked, and, this is another flim-flam and a rope-a-dope, but at the same time, they're squarely focused this next week, Wednesday night, on Vivek, surging right now, and in some polls taking second place to Trump's lead. So DeSantis has this needle to thread here. And meanwhile, at the same time, he continues to say something, and I agree with Julie Kelly, I think he should not say. Regardless of what you think of Trump or DeSantis or their chances or who should be the nominee, I think DeSantis should quit saying that we stop talking about 2020. I think to say we're not going to talk about 2020 anymore is to misunderstand what motivates and angers so many of Trump's voters. And if you think that any of these people are potentially peeled off, if there's any chance you're going to peel off Trump voters to your side, do you think a good strategy is to say, let's just stop talking? about 2020. Is that it? Would you advise that? Seriously, would you advise Team DeSantis to say, if this election is about 2020, we're done. That's in the past. Let's talk about moving forward. Is that wise?
In the Republican primary? Hell no.
Yeah. Now, if you are successful in winning the general, I mean, if Ron DeSantis becomes the nominee and is running against Biden or whoever, do I think he should start talking about 2020? Of course not. No. But when you're trying to score primary points and you're trying to peel off Trump loyalists, I don't think you should tell them, all that 2020 stuff is nonsense. There was a discussion about this over there on Fox.
Speaking of DeSantis, a certain talk show had him on today, Guy Benson, and we were talking about the Trump Truth Social, talking about the press conference he's having Monday, where he says he's going to lay out all of this election evidence, and he's going to provide it very complete and detailed in his Truth Social post. And here is Ron DeSantis on your show talking about that.
If we are fighting about what happened in 2020 or January 6, 2021, if that is what the election ends up about, Joe Biden's going to be hanging out in his basement in Delaware again, not a care in the world, and Republicans are going to lose.
What do you think about that?
It's hard to argue with it. I mean, I'm not going to say definitively that Trump couldn't win a general election. I think he could, especially if the economy's in the toilet, which it might be next year. But overall, as you look at especially the numbers from the Associated Press poll that you highlighted at the beginning of the segment, Brett, the vast majority of independents in this country and swing voters, poll after poll has shown, and election results have shown, they are over all the relitigation, stop the steal, 2020, January 6th, looking back. They don't want any part of that. And for Donald Trump to win a general election, it's going to be a huge challenge if the election cycle is dominated by the Democrats, by the media, and in some respects by Trump, with these backward-looking discussions of something that is absolutely radioactive.
Well, I don't know how to break this to Guy and Brett, but Trump is already radioactive to those people. You're working with the assumption that someone is unfamiliar with Donald Trump at this point. I mean, I don't. I don't live in a world where anyone is unfamiliar with Trump or that there's people to be wooed or coerced over to Trump's side. That ship has sailed, folks. And I also would just respectfully say that any of you that have this mythical unicorn notion that any other Republican is going to woo half this country to their side that hates the Republican brand, it's not going to happen. So I really get exhausted with people who say, Trump is so hated, we need a new face. As if somehow the media landscape and the Democrats are going to be kinder and frame the next guy as a better figure and one worth hearing. They're already, as we've said before, actively framing Ron DeSantis as a Klansman. Just yesterday on CNN, they did an extensive piece. I didn't even talk about it because it wasn't relevant at the time. They did a whole thing, race in America. And they are making this fall and Ron DeSantis' new school year sound like it is a cheerleading session for slavery. The left is telling black Americans that Ron DeSantis, and it's obscene what they're saying. It's disgusting, of course. But the left is actually framing Ron DeSantis and the curriculum of public school in Florida as being pro-slavery, teaching and telling students that slavery had its benefits. So I really, please, stop with this thing that, oh, well, if the election is about Trump and 2020, oh, that's radioactive. Grow up. The Republican brand is radioactive. I don't know how else to break this to you. The Republican Party has a problem. and it's bigger and worse than Donald Trump. I mean, there's the issue of abortion that's going to have to be dealt with somehow. That's not Donald Trump. And by the way, Julie Kelly says this very well. Who wants to tell Guy Benson and people like Ron DeSantis that addressing January 6th is not looking backwards, do they not realize Biden's DOJ is still arresting people every week? That D.C. U.S. Attorney Graves promised to double the existing caseload. Trials will last into 2025 regardless of who is president. Democrats will use January 6th against DeSantis if he wins the primary. Again, no candidate who promises to end the politicization of DOJ but ignores the ongoing J6 prosecutions is not serious. Do we ignore Mark Houck? Do we ignore the story of Mark Houck? Do we ignore the photos? I saw you retweeted the photo yesterday, Fast Eddie, of the J6th detainee in the little, what would you say, 3x8 concrete holding pen that he was laying in shirtless with a bucket to urinate in? Do we stop talking about that? Well, that's radioactive. We got to look forward. We can't look back. Sorry, I strongly disagree. And I realize that all of these guys next week are going to be vying for the Republican nomination. And, you know, I appreciate a forward-looking message, and I appreciate talking about the destruction and the ruin we're living and how they're going to improve it. But anyone who would suggest that this period in history that we've lived through isn't, I mean, I've had personal correspondence with listeners who claim, I can't verify it, but I have no reason to believe they're lying, who've claimed to me FBI agents have come knocking on their door simply because they were in Washington, D.C. on January 6th in just the last few weeks. There are agents still knocking on people's doors just having been in attendance in Washington, D.C. on January 6th on the mall. I don't mean in the building. I don't mean walking in the Capitol. They were just there. This is still very real to millions of Americans. And I agree with Julie Kelly to talk about it like, well, that was then, this is now. No. The memo implores DeSantis to make mention of a personal anecdote or story about his family, children, while showing emotion. A DeSantis-aligned Republican praised the strategy as a solid plan of attack that would highlight his strengths while exploiting the weaknesses of candidates not there to seriously contend for the nomination to serve their own goals. I would only add that the governor would get bonus points if he uses Soros and Vivek in the same sentence, this person added. A veteran Republican strategist not affiliated with any presidential campaign expressed bafflement at putting these suggestions up online. I've done media training with multiple sitting governors, members of Congress, and other Republicans. In a training session, I might give some of these verbal examples, sure. But to write this and then post it? They say that this is, and I don't have any personal information, they say that this is the way a super PAC, my friend Jeff, who is in the campaign consultation business, but not in an official capacity with the DeSantis team, he's running the super PAC, which is different. And legally, you can only be, if you're operating a super PAC that is raising funds to promote a candidate, you cannot work in the official capacity of, if you want, counseling or campaign managing a candidate. Those are different buckets, and they legally have to stay separate. So it is said, and I haven't spoken to them about it, I guess I could get clarification. The claim is that Jeff and the Super PAC can write these memos and post them and send them out into the ether in kind of dark corners of the internet so that legally they're not running afoul of the law, that the campaign can then take this counsel from Jeff without being legally improper in having taken campaign counsel from the super PAC. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally.
But I guess typically this stuff is not publicly consumed. So this is typically, like I say, tucked away somewhere on the internet where most people wouldn't ever see it. But people who know what they're looking for found it. And now this has been made very public. I don't have any idea whether Jeff and his team intended for this to be public consumption or not. It sounds about right. But they're going after Vivek. I don't know. Here's the thing. With Trump having the lead, there's no debating, at least at present, according to the polls, Trump has a lead and a sizable one. You've got to show that you're a strong, solid. Right now, all that matters is you've got to show you're a strong, consolidated number 2 choice. So right now, believe it or not, Trump is not their primary objective. It is the fact that Vivek is coming on strong, and in some polls shows he's surpassing DeSantis. They have to nip that in the bud. They cannot have the rest of this field, any of them in the rest of the field, coming on and giving a challenge to DeSantis for the number 2 slot. DeSantis' job at this point is to give confidence to his donors and to those who support him that he, in spite of being up against this buzzsaw called Donald Trump, can show a formidable fundraising and second-place finish in these early states. That's what he's trying to achieve. Vivek is hobbling him there. That's a problem. They got to put him down politically. So I think next week, and, you know, I guess we'll watch it. Maybe I'll be live tweeting with it. I don't know. We'll have some of the audio, of course. Next week's debate is not going to be about Trump having not been there or what DeSantis says about Trump. Next week's debate is going to be about DeSantis versus Vivek. And I think it's going to be fascinating to watch, frankly. Okay, how are the finances looking this year? It's a tough time for everybody, and making sure you're financially squared away is critically important. You're looking in the rearview mirror to last year, thinking ahead to 2023, and if you're ready to review your financial situation, I hope you do it with Jason Perrette, financial advisor at Eagle Wealth Planning. He's got a passion for this stuff, providing financial services if you're looking to pursue financial independence, true independence, whether you're in retirement, whether you're brand new and just starting out, or you have no retirement savings at all. You're just kind of wanting to get a start, or you're not really happy with who you currently have as an advisor. Jason focuses on producing consistent results for his clients based on their unique financial goals. His main objective is to help you pursue each and every one of your goals. Because he's a fiduciary, he provides clients with complete wealth management and investment services, and it's very personalized and professional. So he can help accomplished entrepreneurs, professionals, retirees, and like I said, even young people get started on pursuing financial independence for the long term. He regularly checks in and revisits your goals too, and assess your risk tolerance and strategies to provide you with a high level of service at the same time. And Jason often likes to say, look, sometimes maybe we're not a fit. I mean, you got to get to know him. He's got to get to know you, and maybe sometimes your goals aren't his. He's got a long-term strategy for your financial health. And so if you want to reach out and talk with him about a new way forward, I hope you'll call today, 816-394-8117, 816-394-8017. Eagle Wealth Partners is linked to my website, by the way, at chrisstigall.com. So if you want to go to chrisstigall.com, you'll click on the website there, and it'll take you right to Jason. You can email him, Jason at eaglewealthplanning.com, eaglewealthplanning.com. Have a discussion about the way forward with your finances. Securities and advisory services offered through Cetera Advisors, LLC, member FINRA, SIPC, a broker-dealer and a registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity. So great to have Dr. Tim Murphy back on the show. We've spoken with him once before. He's a former Pennsylvania state senator and congressman from the Keystone State, author of a book that I was just informed has shot to #1 as the top pastoral care book out there right now, called The Christ Cure. And he's written a piece also that was deeply interesting to us called Gender Dysphoria in Kids. It's time for some serious research. That's at spectator.org. Dr. Murphy, good to have you back, sir.
It's wonderful to be with you. Thank you so much.
Talk to me about, and congratulations about the Christ Cure briefly, if we could, because you must be proud, but it also comes with a sort of, I guess it's bittersweet that your book is so needed right now.
It is needed. We have so many people in this country, in this world, that are struggling with trauma. About 70% of people will face trauma in their life. And people are trying all kinds of things that aren't going to work. They try alcohol, drugs. They try delaying, denying, distorting. They try being angry, gambling, just about any vice involved. And many will go towards counseling, and that's good. That can help. And medication can change how you feel, doesn't change how you think. But what I have found over decades of working with people with trauma including some humbling insights of my own, I realized that getting back to the basics, there are so many great lessons in the Bible that can teach us very concretely what to do about healing from trauma. So this book is a mixture of psychological research and biblical research and also contemporary stories. And I like to refer to it as a handbook for the broken and those who love them. So I hope people will take a look at that.
Amen. The Christ Cure. And I guess pulling out a little bit, it's similar to, I guess it's a nice jumping off point, your piece, Gender Dysphoria in Kids. Is that born out of trauma? What is that? What are we seeing in this rise and this uptick of children claiming they're a different gender, other than the social contagion, which we've talked with, Gad Saad about before? It's there is a popular culture, social media influence to it, I understand, but is it something more?
Well, it's all the above, really. We're in a culture that has faced a lot of trauma and has not been very supportive of trauma. So people have been searching for answers. We now have among young people, particularly adolescents and young adults, the depression and anxiety rates are at about 50% of the population. That's massive. We have about 20% of the population is considered or attempted suicide. So we know something is terribly wrong with our culture. And people are searching for answers. I think they're looking in the wrong places. And one of the places that a lot of youth are looking for is they want to self-diagnose. So they go to TikTok, they go to Instagram. I think TikTok has had tens of billions of searches for mental health disorders. And then people are diagnosing themselves. And then from that, they say, well, if I have these symptoms, I must have these other symptoms too. And that's not the way to diagnose. But you have people diagnosing themselves with all sorts of things, from what they call borderline autism, which I don't really know what that is, to other wide disorders. And one of the disorders that's coming up that people are looking at, and there's unfortunately, a lot of positive publicity for this, is gender dysphoria. And that's described as this sense of unease that a person may have because of a mismatch between their biological sex and what they identify as their gender. There's a lot of pressure on us as psychologists and mental health professionals to be supportive of this, to understand that if that's what kids are thinking, we're supposed to take them at their at face value. We're supposed to ignore a lot of research. And I attended a conference recently, which is giving the background on all this, because I thought it was important to know these things. And I was just shocked, or maybe not shocked, at the amount of ignoring bad research on this and ignoring good research. I'll give you a quick example. We all know, we've been through our adolescent years. We know it's a struggle. Childhood isn't perfect. And a lot of that is because the brain is really dominated by the emotional parts, the limbic system. And so kids can have wide mood swing and angst and struggles, et cetera. That's part of growing up. Boys are uncomfortable, girls are uncomfortable growing up. And as time goes on, they develop more of an identity. But what helps that is the front of the brain really takes over by about time of age 25. Now, the whole criminal justice system knows this, because we say kids are not held criminally responsible under age 18. You can't sign a contract under age 18. You can't join the military, vote. You can't drive a car till you're 16. Can't buy alcohol, because the whole legal system understands that there's an immaturity that takes place. But what's happened is the mental health community has really twisted this and say, no, kids can really understand and make decisions when they're 5 or 6 or 10. And they may think about it. They may also think about any other kind of thing. I want to be a truck driver, a fireman, a pilot, whatever that is, an astronaut. But those things change with time. But what's happening is the mental health community is saying, well, let's consider that permanent. And then the dangerous things happen. One of those is that they will have the child surrounded by other people who are themselves maybe trans or have other gender dysphoria, as opposed to try and help them with a more positive peer group and stop the teasing, etc.
Confirmation bias is what you're saying there.
Exactly. There you go.
Yeah.
Surrounded with people like that. And then they will recommend using some hormones to block puberty, and later on some hormones to trans their gender, such as testosterone to a girl or estrogen to a boy. And here's the thing they say, is, well, the risk of suicide is so high that it's better to have the side effects of the hormones than to risk suicide. Now, parents who are panicking say, my gosh, I guess so. I guess I should go along with this. Here's what happens, though. It's not true. Well, first of all, when they say that these risks for suicide are higher, yes, they are. But if you really look at the research, sometimes they look at these studies for just a few months or a few years, and you really have to go to 8 to 10 years to look at this. A study that just came out of Denmark, I believe, said that with regard to suicide, the rate of suicide attempts and ideation is 7 times that for those who are in the trans community than the others, and it's 3.5 times greater risk of suicide death. So this idea that you're going to prevent suicide is wrong. The second thing is, as far as side effects go with hormones, you have just the puberty blockers alone. It's blocking bone development. These hormones are necessary for development of the brain, so you're delaying development of the brain for a decade or so. You can then have other things like osteoporosis, mood disorders, depression, cognitive impairments, and of course, sometimes even a worsening of gender dysphoria. Then when you look at the other hormones they may take, you risk diabetes and blood clots with heart disease, strokes, pulmonary embolism, fertility problems, suicidality, cancer, all sorts of things there. So this whole idea that somehow there's no victim, there's no problem with this, is absolutely false. And what's going on with this is not only pressure on us as mental health professionals to go along with this. We're not allowed to talk about religion or faith. They consider that to be transphobic and anti their approach. But they also, some states have passed laws where it's criminal for parents to block their kids from going through this.
Yes.
Some states have passed laws that say it's criminal if the kids go through this. And so you have these contradictory laws because this false information is getting out to legislators. And my point is, everybody needs to press pause on this and really look at the longitudinal, more sophisticated research, not these studies of one person, because the dangers here are permanent. And this has to be done.
And does it have to start? In New Jersey, we were just talking about this. There's an unthinkable scenario where the government of New Jersey is suing school districts simply for demanding that if this subject comes up with students in public school, the school board's rules were you tell the parents immediately. The state of New Jersey steps in and is actively, at present, we're waiting for a judge to decide. The state of New Jersey's official position is no. Keep that secret and keep it from the parents. The school board has no right to demand that staff and teachers tell parents if kids are battling gender dysphoria. I'm aghast, quite frankly, that the state would fight a local school board over the notion of informing parents about something like this, but that's where we are.
And this is what happens when legislators are ignorant. Bad science makes bad laws. And this idea that parents are not to be trusted is something that's been whittling away for the last few years, because you can find parents who are bad parents.
Sure.
And so mental health professionals are working with bad parents will go on to tell legislators, oh, look, here's some examples where parents did bad things. Well, you can't use those sort of things to decide what's going on for everybody. There's a lot of good parents who care about and love their children, and that's what should be primary in kids' lives. There's also an interesting medical diagnosis called Munchausen's syndrome by proxy. And that is where a parent or a loved one will actually begin to create symptoms in a child by either encouraging them certain ways, in psychological ways, or in some cases actually doing some medical manipulation. And in a case like that, they say, isn't this terrible because these adults who should be loving are influencing this child negatively and causing medical problems? Well, what we're looking at now, I would call more Munchausen syndrome by politician, that they're infusing these pathologies on parents and on kids without a basis in facts. The literature is, if you try to do some searches on some of these things, you have to go several pages back because it's pushed down. And most of the things that people are referring to are magazine articles, which quote magazine articles, which quote websites, which quotes some bad study. I'll give you an example of a bad study. When people have gender change surgery, they say 99.7% do not regret it. All right, let's look at that. So I looked it up. Well, what happens is they will look at a group of people and they define regret as someone who actually goes and has surgery to reverse it. And this one study said they didn't count people who were grieving, but they also didn't look at people who were depressed, who were on psychiatric medication, who were suicidal, had other problems. The study did not report how many people dropped out. And the study that I read only followed people for a little over a year. Well, you have to look at these things over a time span of 8 to 10 years, longitudinally. You have to compare the groups, those who did and those who did not. You have to really dig deeply in this, but these are superficial studies that are, and one can always come up with an example of someone who's really struggled. I get it, I understand, I've talked to such people. But to make these wide-sweeping legislative edicts where we're saying we're going to punish parents and separate them from children. In California, they want to have a law that 12-year-olds can decide to leave their family if they're not agreeing with them.
Massachusetts too, I think, right? Yeah, something like it.
And other states too are looking at this to make it illegal to be a parent.
Yes.
And that's just wrong.
May I ask, Dr. Murphy, I hate to pile on here because I know there are children's hospitals in the country, around the country, that are renowned for their work in pediatric surgeries and illnesses, but I'm terrified at what I think I hear developing in a lot of the halls and offices of these children's hospitals, that this is becoming a cottage industry, pushing this on minor children, surgeries and drugs and whatnot, billions of dollars. Dare I say, is it possible there's a profit incentive by children's hospitals, pediatricians, to start pushing this as a psychology?
Well, some of this really began in doing some work where some surgeons said, if we provide these surgeries and hormonal changes, we can help prevent the symptoms from worsening. And so they followed a few kids. This then became contagion across other medical places. Is there money in it? Yes, there is. Is there money in the hormones? Yes, there is. But this is, I still would say, in the realm of looking at adult research and putting it on children, there's no other area of medicine where you automatically say studies on adults apply to the pediatric world. But I'm very suspicious of this. And, to suddenly see so many children have this diagnosis that a few years we didn't even hear about it is a serious problem. There's in Pittsburgh here, there was a study done on a high school, and they wanted to know from the high school students how many were concerned about some gender confusion. So what they did is they gave a questionnaire to all the students in the high school. And it was actually, there's 4,930 students in this high school. And of that, they said 91% responded. Okay, that's kind of a decent amount, but that's still a dropout rate. And they said of that, they asked the kids several questions, but two of the questions asked the kids, what gender were you born with, and what your sex assigned at birth, and what's your current gender identity. Well, they took anybody in which there was a disparity of those. It was, here's this group that has problems. They said it's 10%. I said, well, wait a minute. How many of these kids did they actually accept their questionnaires? It's actually only 64%, not 91%, 3,168. And then, I'm looking at this adolescent population. Who answers these questions honestly? Mm-hmm. And did they go back and do interviews and say, all right, did you answer this question honestly or not? These are high school kids. And yet what has happened is what began as this 9.2% of kids that say they have some level of gender questioning became, even a couple paragraphs later in the study, the author said nearly 10%. And then I see it quoted in newspapers as 10%, and it goes on from there. But this is part of the statistical creep. I think Mark Twain once said there's lies, damn lies, and statistics. And these are used to justify. So justified, let's give them hormones, it's better than suicide. Suicide is high risk. You're not going to kill yourself if you have these treatments. Parents are standing in the way. Religion's standing in the way. This conference I attended to just say that they counsel children to deal with the transphobia of religion, so to stay away from that too. This is really a crisis mode because their psychologists are being threatened to lose their license if they do not go along with this.
Wow.
If we question the science, what they do is they're trying to pressure people to leave.
I hate siloing our society, but it seems to me increasingly, I spend a lot of time in the Christian education space. I think the back of public education has to be broken. I believe that to save the country. Beyond this subject, I think just universally speaking, public education as a construct needs to end. I think Christian education is the way forward, or certainly private homeschooling education is the way forward. I similarly believe Christian psychologists and psychiatrists are critical now. How about you?
Absolutely. There is a growing number of psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors who are leaving their state and their national associations. For example, the American Association of Christian Counselors now has 50,000 members in it. The Catholic Psychotherapy Association, I think, is close to 1,000 members, and these are growing. And there's other ones too. But what has happened is sometimes those opponents will just dismiss us as, well, you're quacks or you're biased. Look, I've met a lot of great people in all these associations. They care deeply about families and children. And we also care deeply about objective data in science. But what you say, too, about education is the recent Supreme Court decision really gives an opportunity for parents for return to Christian education and homeschooling, and charter schools. The decision also about, who would have thought it would come from this, the business that would not make a wedding cake for a couple.
Yes.
That went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and saying you cannot stop someone's business practice or providing a service or product for religious reasons. You can't sue them. So I think this is what we're going to see here is a blowback against these state and federal associations, which put pressure on mental health people from trying to really compassionately help people. And I think you're going to see a lot more lawsuits. There are some suits filed now among young men and women who have turned 18 and have gone back and say, why was this pushed on me? How is it that at age 12 or 13, a girl could have a radical double mastectomy, saying that was going to solve her problems of depression? It is outrageous to think that that's what we've come down to. We used to think that cupping and bleeding and leeching and all those things was going to cure people. Look, I do not doubt that there are people who have some real struggles with their gender identity. I do not doubt that at all. But this is widespread, and a lot of this is pushed on by adults who are ignoring the research.
Dr. Tim Murphy, and it all comes back to the book that is now #1 in pastoral care, because that's it. The answer is the title of your book, The Christ Cure. People need the love of Christ in their life. Dr. Tim Murphy, it's a pleasure to talk with you again, sir. I hope we can do it again very, very soon.
Thank you very much. Further information, I have a website, drtimmurphy.com. That's drtimmurphy.com. My podcast, my notes here. And Chris, it's an honor to be with you. Really love your show.
Likewise, sir. Talk again soon. This, I may not have been totally fair to this Anheuser-Busch guy, Billy Bush. Not Billy Bush from formerly Access Hollywood and the Trump grab him by the video. This is Billy Bush, one of the 12 brothers and sisters of the Anheuser-Busch fortune. I thought he sounded a little clunky talking about people who drink beer, but he's now being embraced by a lot of people on the right as the, I don't know, what do you want to call, the Make Anheuser-Busch Great Again, MABA movement.
That might be, you have to coin that. That might be the first time it's been used. MABA.
MABA. M-A-B-A. Make Anheuser-Busch Great Again. He said he wants to buy back Bud Light should the beer's parent company, InBev, want to sell it. If they, oh, by the way, yesterday, you Eagles fans are going to love this. So yesterday, I filled in for my friend Vince at WMAL in Washington, D.C. Vince Colonnese, who does the afternoon show. They called me and asked if I'd fill in, so I did. And it was yesterday that the Washington Commanders announced, you can't make this up. The Washington Commanders announced their official beer partnership. They were excited to announce they'd partnered with Bud Light, the official beer of the Washington Commanders. I knew you guys would love that. I knew you'd love it. Anyway, Billy Bush said if they don't want this brand any longer, sell it back to the Bush family. Sell it back to me. I'll be the first in line to buy that brand back from you, and we'll make that brand great again. Speaking of brands taking it on the chin, Target. Target sales have slumped dramatically. Where did that go? I had that right here. Well, where'd it go? I thought I had that. Anyway, long story short, Target's market share has slipped substantially since their dalliance with the Satanist and the LGBTQ plus baby wear, which is a beautiful thing to see. That on the heels of the Starbucks lawsuit, that one district manager being paid over $30 million by Starbucks for them taking a knee, bowing to the woke mob, and firing this white woman for no cause whatsoever. That's a great thing. Disney, ESPN taking it on the chin, Sage Steele publicly fighting with them and winning. Corporate America is really losing. I mean, they're hiding from the DEI stuff. They're hiding from ESG stuff. They're in retreat. Corporate America is, the marketplace is organically reacting. We are reacting in angry ways. I go back to rich men north of Richmond as an example. that song is an anthem to the righteous anger of the American people. And the American people, we may not be heard at the ballot box. We may not feel like our voices are being heard when it comes to elections. And we know that the government is actively working to silence and censor us when it comes to election time. But when we're given free market choice to consume or not to consume products, we're seeing corporate America really pay the price. So in many ways, these are little elections. From Disney to Starbucks to Target. I look at these as miniature elections, and we're winning elections. I look at Rich Men North of Richmond, that song surging to number one. I look at that as a miniature election. I just saw polling today, and this is of registered voters, mind you. This is not even of likely voters. This is just people who have voted at some point. Has Biden made the economy better or worse? Worse. 52% of registered voters, all voters, over half of everyone who's just registered. Now, when you sample actual likely voters, I guarantee it's higher. And he has made everything worse. Consumer prices are up 16%. Home prices are up almost 12%. Credit card debt is up over 30%. Gas prices are up 62%. He has made everything demonstrably worse. People feel it. They know it. It's rich men north of Richmond. So I take heart that the country is very much alive and well and recognizes what's going on. It's just, this is why I say, when we talk about the 2020 elections, people, it doesn't make sense to look at the numbers and say, this husk, this withering old fool, hiding behind his mask in a basement with a couple of cars outside meeping, it doesn't make sense that he got more votes in the history of elections than any man has ever received for president of the United States, including the most historic first black president, or biracial, as Sage Steele says. It doesn't make sense to people. It's just on its face. It's inexplainable. How does a feeble old man who doesn't campaign get 81 million votes? Given all that we knew, and given all that we know about him, and the fact that the country had rejected him twice before, the fact that he was dead last amongst Democrats when he was running. Nobody wanted him in his own party, and then suddenly he surges. It never made sense to people. It has always set funny with even people on the left, and they know it, but they don't want to admit it. So they call us kooks and they call us conspiracy theorists. There are millions of people who believe that the election is just fundamentally rigged and flawed. And so this is why I caution people like Ron DeSantis in this strategy of saying, if the election is about 2020, we'll lose. I understand what he's saying. What he's saying is he wants to put forward a positive vision of the future. But to say that, you sound dismissive of Donna. Does that make sense? People like Donna don't like being told, you're nuts. Let's stop talking about 2020 and rigging. We got to think about tomorrow. We can do both. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. People believe, and I think rightly, and I think Vivek Ramaswamy tackles this very well. When rigged elections come up, Vivek has figured out how to thread this needle. He says, do I think elections were rigged? He handles it exactly the way I personally answer it. Yeah, I do. I think that tens of millions of people in this country were deprived of real information about how deeply corrupt the Biden family is. And had they known, polls show it, had they known, had the media not lied, along with 51 former intelligence officials, lied in signing a document wholly manufactured that the Hunter Biden laptop wasn't, in fact, a Russian made-up story, but rather very real. Had those stories been told to the American public at large, had the American public at large understood the corruption of the Biden family, I believe tens of millions of people would have changed their vote, and ultimately it would have made Donald Trump president again. So yes, was there collusion and rigging of that election? Yes. And that's before we even get into the unconstitutional acts of the way votes were tabulated in places like Pennsylvania. So please don't tell me that 2020 is behind us. Let's forget about it. Let's not, if the election's about 2020, then we'll lose. I would argue we've already lost if we move off of 2020 and don't relitigate it. Because we haven't learned anything. And people like Donna are very concerned that we haven't learned anything. And I hear her. So am I. I don't like being told, that was then, this is now. Put 2020 in the rearview mirror and forget about it. We shouldn't. Just like we shouldn't forget about COVID. This country was hijacked. We were hijacked. Does everyone understand that? We were mentally, and in some cases physically, hijacked. Our way of life, the way we vote, the way we go to church, the way we educate our kids, our businesses, our culture was hijacked. So to say, let's stop talking about 2020, I'm not going to stop talking about 2020. Never. 2020 will forever be a cautionary tale to my loved ones, my grandchildren, if I'm fortunate enough to live that long, my great-grandchildren. I will tell them of 2020 and 2021 and 22. I will tell them of that time in American history and what an abject march on our freedoms and our liberties and a hijacking of this country that was, and how we must learn from it and never, ever, ever repeat it again. I will tell them of the Department of Justice colluding with social media to keep information from you and me. I will tell them of forced masking and shots as a condition of keeping our jobs. I will speak of this for the rest of my life. I will speak of my closed church for over a year and a half for the rest of my life. I will speak of that event being used to hijack our elections for the rest of my life. So with all due respect, please do not tell me to stop talking about 2020. Don't ever ask me that. Don't ask Donna that. People are very concerned it's coming again. Do you understand? And they want to make sure that everyone's eyes wide open on the Republican side, that if they did it to us before, they're very capable of doing it again. In fact, they're practiced at it now. So please don't say that was then, this is now. 20 years in business. Congratulations to Mike Lindell and MyPillow. 80 million pillows sold over those 20 years. Can you believe that number? Well, Mike and his team at MyPillow, they want to thank each and every one of you for giving them such success over these many years, and now they want to celebrate by giving you the lowest price in MyPillow history. He told me that if you call or log on to MyPillow.com or call them today, you'll get a queen-size MyPillow to celebrate their 20 years in business for just $19.98. 20 years and just about $20 with tax. How about that? $19.98, that's it, for a queen-size MyPillow. Do you know the regular price of this thing is almost $50 more? So you're talking about a $50 discount. By the way, for the king size, you'll get it for just $10 more, $29.98. It's a huge sale. And incidentally, in addition to these pillows that are deeply discounted right now, you go to MyPillow.com and you'll get a discount using my name, Chris Podcast. Use that as your promo code, Chris Podcast. Click on the radio listener square and enter that. And you're talking about mattress toppers, pet beds, mattresses, my slippers, sheets, and of course the pillows, so much more. You can try it on. If ever you've gone to MyPillow.com and you've thought to yourself, maybe it's a little expensive, now's the time. Celebrate 20 years with Mike Lindell. And know this, 10-year warranty. 10 years they warranty these things. So if they ever wear out or you have trouble, you can exchange for brand new. 60 days they let you take this stuff home, and if you don't like it, you can send it back for a full refund. So you got nothing to lose but a great night's sleep on MyPillow products. I've colleagues I've sent these My Slippers to. They love them. Christine loves hers. The sheets are comfortable. The towels are super absorbent. Even old Dean loves his dog bed. And we drink my coffee here at the office every day. I just brewed some this morning. MyPillow.com, promo code Chris Podcast, all right? With that warranty fully intact, or call 800-932-5056. 800-932-5056, promo code Chris Podcast. Or MyPillow.com, promo code Chris Podcast, if you please to save. Did you see this story earlier in the week? I've been sitting on this for our friend Daniel Turner, who I knew would have something to say about it. Daniel Turner is the founder and executive director of Power the Future. PowerTheFuture.com, the website. He's Daniel Turner, PTF, on Twitter. Montana judge sides with youth in historic climate trial. The young people who sued Montana over climate issues. A judge on Monday found that the treasurer of the state they sued is violating its residents' right to a clean environment, delivering a major victory to 16 kids. Daniel Turner, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on your program.
Yeah. Did you read much about this exactly?
I did, and these types of children's lawsuits have happened multiple times. This is the first one that actually received an initial positive verdict. It will get overturned, but it's frustrating that we have to go through this process. It's frustrating that adults are just using children for their cause. We have an ongoing problem in our society where we prey upon children, whether it's for trans issues or drag queen issues or climate issues. Adults who have some leftist agenda hide behind children to accomplish it, and they're doing the same thing. There is no 12-year-old kid who thinks I have to sue the government because I'm worried about climate change. This is all pressed upon them by adults who are committed leftists. And so it's frustrating, but at this point, everything is absolutely not shocking anymore.
The case is being watched, writes Politico, nationwide as a bellwether for litigants who want to hold governments and fossil fuel companies accountable for climate change.
Ooh.
The verdict could serve as a model. The verdict could serve as a model for similar youth-led lawsuits in other states. So propagandists, little brown shirt twerps, are doing, as you say, the bidding of the adult eco-wacko left.
Yeah, and it's easy for to dismiss this, and I wish I had gone to law school, because if you truly believe this, if you as a young person are this worried about the future because of fossil fuels, then I have a couple of really important suggestions for you. First of all, get rid of all of your oil products in your home, and that means your little smartphone, and that means you can't use TikTok or any streaming services. I tell this to young people all the time. The streaming services in your house use more energy than any appliance. So if you are gaming, if you are on Fortnite, if you are streaming Netflix, that puts your refrigerator absolutely to shame. That uses more energy. So if you are truly worried about climate change as a young person, then you need to forego all of the richness of the fossil fuel economy. You can't have it both ways. And I'm sorry, if you're going to act like an adult and demand to be treated like an adult, then I'm going to treat you like an adult. And as an adult, I would say you cannot embrace the richness of a fossil fuel lifestyle while then condemning the fossil fuel industry. If you hate oil and gas and coal, then give up all of your... One of the kids who sued was a ski instructor. And I wish I could throttle this kid and say, what do you think your skis are made of? Your Gore-Tex jacket? What do you think your poles, your goggles? What do you think all of your boots, your gondola system? How do you get all these idiots up and down the mountain? Do you think they're riding a donkey? Right? So you cannot have all of the richness of the fossil fuels we provide. Just be humble enough to say thank you and keep your damn mouth shut. So you know what? You want to step into the arena? Then let's try to treat these children like adults. And then you know what happens then when we bash them, Chris? Then we're told, you're so mean to children. Why are you so mean to the children? So they're a perfect shield.
They are. Yeah. It's interesting. Kids are useful to them when they're not killing them in the womb. So I don't know why they're so keen on killing them on the left. But that's another show. Daniel Turner is founder, executive director of Power the Future. Daniel, the story out of Maui is so tragic, and I have learned a lot about the way that island is powered since. I didn't know much about it. I'd never been to Hawaii. I never thought about it. I was stunned to read that at present, Hawaiian Electric, who supplies Maui with their electricity needs, 80% of the energy, the power they use, comes from petroleum. I had no idea. And, of course, they've got to import it at that, and what a painful price we're all paying for that right now, but we didn't used to. So this energy company, the Hawaiian Electric, they have been piling on them, the state of Hawaii has, and the Democrats have, to move off of almost exclusively petroleum to power the island's needs to all green energy, 100% by 2045. So what that means is Hawaiian Electric is in this catch-22. Like, what do they invest in? Yeah. So now they're getting ready to blame Hawaiian Electric's infrastructure for the power lines snapping, sparking, and causing the fire. But it could also be said that they've been focusing all their energies now on, this tilting at windmills crap. So it's a perfect storm of Democrat malfeasance, it seems to me.
Absolutely. And this is what happens when you have agenda-filled propagandists who get elected into office, because this is probably a mandate from the city council. It's probably a mandate at the Hawaii legislature, at the state level, that then they push all these rules down. I genuinely feel for the utility company. It's problem of being one of these quasi-government agencies. If they were left to their own accord to say, how do we provide the most reliable, most abundant, most affordable electricity to the people of this state, I think they would have a high success rate. But they get these rules that are passed by people who don't understand the way the power grid runs. And then they have to comply by the rules. And then when the power grid fails, because as you said, it's a catch-22, we're not investing in grid maintenance. We're investing in trying to find land for solar fields. When they're not investing in grid maintenance and the grid sparks or it causes fire or maybe whatever happens, do they get the blame? Do the legislators get the blame for bad legislation? And this is across the board. Every time leftists get their hands on power, look at in an analogous situation, look at your healthcare premiums. Look at how much you pay ever since Barack Obama decided to tinker with the healthcare policy of this country. He doesn't know a damn thing about healthcare, but boy, did he stick his hands in it. And now what do? You complain about your doctor. You complain about the hospital. You're angry at – they're just trying to follow a law that some bozo in Washington, D.C. passed on Christmas Eve because they don't know what the hell they're doing in healthcare. And this just happens over and over again in so many of our industries. People who do not know what they're talking about get power. They pass ideological laws that the actual experts have to somehow comply with, and it creates nothing but chaos.
My friend John Hayward said this on Twitter: climate change is a perfect excuse for inept and corrupt public officials to escape accountability. Whenever their idiotic policies cause a massive disaster, they just scream climate change and scurry away. And you can expect a lot more of this because it works, he said.
Yeah, it's the Pontius Pilate method of governing, right? You just wash your hands of all responsibility. And that's wonderful because, and I've said this often, no one really runs for governor or mayor to work. Yeah. You run for governor or mayor. Look at Chris Christie. Yes. You think he's going to get his hands dirty and do the hard job? He's on these idiot shows on MSNBC because it's about ego. It's about an agenda. It's about him yelling at Donald Trump, right? So when you're Gavin Newsom and you're a narcissist and you're playing with your hair and you're making all these TikTok videos, now you have the governor's mansion. Do you think he really wants to do forest maintenance? Forest management is so boring. I'm yawning just saying it on your program, forest management. So he doesn't want to do a damn thing about the forests. He could care less about the forests. And then when the forests burn, and they only seem to burn in California, right? Utah, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, nowhere else in that region do they burn. They only burn in California. And when they burn, what does he do? Climate change. Nothing I can do. It's climate change's fault. So climate change is the excuse to wash your hands of the boring part of governing. And you don't have to worry about grid maintenance in Maui, climate change, right? You get to focus on the fun things: gun confiscation, abortion expansion, trans children, the real reason why people should run for office, right? Not the boring things like making sure things work.
Daniel Turner is founder, executive director of Power the Future, powerthefuture.org, and he's Daniel Turner, PTF, on Twitter. A couple of headlines to the auto industry. Auto workers fight over electric vehicles put Joe Biden on the spot. Biden backing off of his full-throated support for unions by calling on auto workers and the Big Three to reach a deal in their dispute over the transition to electric vehicles. I'm asking all sides to work together to forge a fair agreement. Workers threatening to strike unless Ford, GM, and Stellantis agree to pay United Auto Workers level wages and benefits to all joint venture U.S. plants making batteries for EVs. Workers at plants operated by joint ventures between the Big Three and foreign battery manufacturers earn far less than their counterparts. Meanwhile, I'll just throw in for good measure, the Washington Examiner had a piece a few days ago. Here's why electric vehicle batteries have shorter lifespans in cold weather. I think we all understand this. The same principle applies to when you have your cell phone out in extreme temperatures, right? I would think. Daniel?
Absolutely. I tell you this, if your audience wants to have a fun experiment, take your smartphone and put it in the freezer and come back in a couple hours and see what the battery is doing. And you'd be surprised at how quickly extreme temperatures suck out battery life, and whether it's extreme hot or extreme cold. And that's not a knock on batteries. That's just a reality.
Yep.
And so, yeah, if you have an EV and you're going to use it in the extreme cold or the extreme heat, you don't have an EV. You have art. You have a sculpture in your driveway, and it may look like it's fully charged and it may be very expensive and shiny, but it's not going to work. That's a drawback of the EV industry. And when it comes to Biden calling for all sides to get along, it's kind of like that Nazi-esque speech he gave at Independence Hall a couple months ago, where he said, we want to come together as I scream at my opponents and tell them how evil they are. Joe Biden stuck his nose in the auto industry, not knowing a damn thing about it, other than the fact that he drives around on a Trans Am for photo ops. But he knows nothing about the auto industry, but he forced a mandate on them. You will make X percent of cars EVs by this year. Where did those numbers come from? Purely arbitrary. They're not market-driven. They're not data-driven. They're not research-driven. They're political goals. And so the auto industry is now scrambling to comply with a mandate that some idiot in Washington, D.C., who does not know their industry, pushed upon them. So what is happening? Ford announced they're losing $4.5 billion because of their conversion to the EV market. That's a lot of money, and that's a lot of jobs, and that's, of course, going to be a bailout to the taxpayers. So now Joe Biden gets to say, hey, everybody, we all need to work together. How about you just get your damn nose out of our business, right? It's amazing how here it is in a nutshell, Chris. Joe Biden does not believe in freedom. He doesn't believe in free markets. He doesn't believe in free people. He ultimately believes in the state. And he believes that as the president, he is smarter, better equipped, and he should be making decisions about you. He is, not only is it his responsibility, it's his mandate. It is his order from God. He doesn't believe in God. Who am I kidding? It is his order from Gaia herself that he should dictate your life. And when you don't believe in freedom, this is the type of chaos you get. You get government rules that just create havoc on markets, on freedom, on liberty, and you get where we are right now in America.
You know, Daniel, it was such a beautiful evening last night. I went out on the water. I took my boat out on the water, and I sat out there for a while. I went for a little cruise, and I felt very blessed and fortunate that I was able to do it. And I was taking in nature and thinking about the fact that I'd gassed up my boat and I drove it out there into the middle of the lake, just sit and kind of chill out for a while. And I'm looking off in the distance. I'm watching big trucks hauling their campers at the park campsite, and I'm watching guys on their motorcycles, and I'm watching people in their boats. And all I kept thinking was, there's a whole movement in this country that wants to eliminate all of this, because I guess if it's not electric, it's no damn good. And as far as I know, there's not an extension cord long enough for your boat. So if they see this through to its logical conclusion, I guess people that enjoy motorcycles and RVs and boats and recreational things, hauling things, towing things, I guess those days are short, perhaps? I don't know.
That's what I am afraid of, because liberty lost is never returned, right? Freedom and property lost is never returned. When the state takes something, it does not give it back. And so we talk about these things, combustion engine bans, gas stove bans, gas hot water heater bans. If they go through with it and we realize in 10 years, wow, this stinks, the government's not going to reverse course. That's just going to become the new status quo. Again, let's liken it to Obamacare. Here we are. If you are looking at your premiums and they're 3 times what you used to pay a decade ago, No one in the Obamacare world has looked, not even Republicans. Heck, when they had the chance to overturn it, what did John McCain do? Because he wanted to stick his thumb in the eye of Donald Trump. He voted against overturning it. No one looks at your healthcare world and says, wow, guys, we really screwed this up bad. This is not working. This is expensive. It's bureaucratic. It's bloated. It's failing. Nope, that's it. That is now the new normal in the healthcare industry, and we will make legislation based upon the new normal. It's putting crap on top of Band-Aids, on top of duct tape, and it will just get worse and worse. And that's what will happen in this space. And when they say, wow, these combustion engine bans were a bad idea, we should let people have their RVs back. Nope, that's not going to happen. Freedom lost, culture lost, property lost is never returned. And if we lose it, then that is going to be the new normal. And quite frankly, I don't want that new normal. I don't think the American people do either.
He's Daniel Turner, and he's always on point. He's the founder and executive director of Power the Future, powerthefuture.com, at Daniel Turner, PTF, on Twitter, if you want to follow him there. Or now X, it's called. I got to get used to that, Daniel. Great to talk to you, my friend. Have a great weekend.
The Chris Stigall Show podcast.